Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in something really quite unique in the political landscape. It's Nepal's Gen Z anti-corruption revolution, often called the Kranti. Now, our source material doesn't just frame this as, another protest. It positions it as potentially the world's first serious, credible shot by young people to build a genuinely corruption-free nation, right from the roots up. The implications are just huge, whatever the final outcome turns out to be.
They really are. And, the sheer speed and, frankly, the effectiveness of this whole movement have kicked off this secondary issue, which is fascinating in itself. It's a crisis of attribution, you could say.
Attribution?
Yeah, because when something this big, this successful happens seemingly overnight, well, the global conspiracy theories, they just pop up everywhere, don't they? People struggle to square that kind of local success with, the history books full of external meddling.
Exactly. So that's the core tension we're diving into for you today. It centers on this claim, swirling around certain, let's say, geopolitical circles and definitely online, that this movement, which looks entirely youth-led, was actually secretly masterminded from Washington, specifically the CIA or maybe the State Department. It's that classic puppet master narrative, right?
Yeah.
Controlling things from afar.
Right. And what makes our sources so compelling on this is how they tackle that specific claim. They don't just give you a dry point-by-point rebuttal. Instead, they hit back with this really powerful, almost high-octane counter-narrative, and it's soaked in satire. They just relentlessly push this idea that it was purely homegrown, improvised, completely separate from any kind of meticulously planned foreign op.
Okay, so let's really dig into that. This dual narrative, you've got the myth, the sort of legend of the sophisticated, all-powerful foreign and crashing right into the reality of what looks like messy, spontaneous, local, youth-driven energy. And the sources, they're brilliant here. They lean right into that conspiracy idea. They even adopt this satirical phrase, everything happens because of the CIA. Like, it's a consoprate brand for conspiracy thinking, just to completely mock the whole idea.
Yeah, that phrase, it sets the tone immediately, doesn't it? It tells you straight up that this analysis isn't just fact-checking. It's digging into how these global conspiracy narratives even get built in the first place. But we have to keep in mind the seriousness of the underlying event here. This is a genuine attempt, driven by young people, for a corruption-free country that's monumental, especially in a region with, deep-seated challenges. Our mission, really, is to explore the arguments the sources make that cement this Gen Z Kranti as uniquely Nepalese, something owned entirely by its own young citizens, free of any external puppet strings.
Right. So to start taking apart that foreign mastermind claim, where did the sources begin? Well, like any good critique, they look at the alleged mastermind itself, their own moral position, their logistical capability. And they basically throw the idea of American moral authority on this issue right out the window from the get-go.
Yes, they build this argument around American hypocrisy. That's the first pillar. And the logic is, it's strikingly simple. Almost hard to argue with, actually. If the CIA were truly that effective, that capable of sparking a successful anti-corruption movement, wouldn't a logical, even self-interested organization use that power where the corruption is arguably biggest and has the most consequence, which is at home?
That's a really sharp counterpoint because a skeptic might say, well, the CIA's job is foreign intelligence, securing U.S. interests abroad, not fixing domestic issues. Yeah. But the sheer scale of the domestic corruption the sources point to, it just kind of shreds the idea that the U.S. could successfully export an anti-corruption solution when it can't, or maybe just chooses not to, solve that same problem internally.
Right, precisely. The material paints a very clear and, frankly, pretty unflattering picture of the U.S. domestic scene. It argues that if you measure it dollar for dollar, institutionalized influence peddling, the U.S. might just be arguably the most financially compromised major country on earth. It's presented as this systemic thing baked right into the financial and political DNA.
And they don't just make vague claims. The sources give really vivid, specific examples. Like they talk about powerful lobbyists buying senators like baseball cards on Capitol Hill. That's just a stunning visual, isn't it? It immediately tells you how transactional lawmaking can be perceived. Billions of dollars, apparently, in legalized influence just operating out in the open.
Yeah, and that image, it clashes so hard with the supposed goal of the Kranti in Nepal. The material also highlights the whole revolving door thing, Wall Street execs, industry insiders, cycling in and out of key government or regulatory jobs, and it's described not just as a rotation, but like a revolving door at a five-star hotel. That suggests comfort, convenience, mutual benefit, but only for the elite. It's painted as a highly efficient system for keeping things as they are, not for shaking them up.
And then there's the military-industrial complex. Can't forget that. cited as making trillion-selling weapons nobody asked for. Fine. So when you pile up the sheer scale of these domestic issues, the trillions in influence, the systemic nature of political favors, the embedded industrial interests, the conclusion the sources draw feels almost, well, unavoidable. If this alleged mastermind could start an anti-corruption revolution anywhere, logic dictates they'd start on Capitol Hill, right? Where the financial stakes are astronomical and the hypocrisy, according to the sources, is most glaring. The whole idea of exporting integrity from what they frame as the world's most financially compromised nation, it just feels inherently illogical, almost absurd.
And what's crucial is how the sources use this hypocrisy argument. It's not just a moral slapdown, it's presented as evidence of logistical impossibility. The argument is the very people and systems heavily invested in maintaining that domestic status quo, the beneficiaries of that five-star revolving door, they're highly unlikely to be the sophisticated architects engineering its complete opposite thousands of miles away in Nepal. It works as this immediate, very practical rejection of the whole conspiracy claim.
Okay, so that effectively demolishes the moral high ground argument, which leads us perfectly into the second part of the rebuttal, and this is where the satire really ramps up. The supposed CIA and State Department competency crisis.
Right.
This is where the sources just have a field day mocking the image of the all-powerful invisible foreign hand.
Right. They essentially just ask you, the listener, to stop and think critically about the alleged masterminds themselves. Who are these people, really? And they use these anecdotes, these stories of bureaucratic nightmare scenarios to just ridicule the idea of crushing institutional incompetence within the very organization supposedly pulling off this lightning-fast, super-efficient digital revolution in Nepal.
Let's dig into that bureaucratic critique a bit. It's quite something. The sources basically mock the idea that State Department staffers, who are allegedly capable of orchestrating a zero-budget nationwide youth uprising in Kathmandu, are somehow the exact same bureaucrats routinely mocked on Capitol Hill for being unable to write memos in plain English or answer emails on time. That contrast is just devastatingly effective, isn't it?
This creates this huge cognitive dissonance, yeah. How can someone who apparently struggles with basic office tasks, like hitting an email deadline, be simultaneously managing a secret, complex, incredibly time-sensitive foreign revolution? The typical grinding inefficiency of bureaucracy just doesn't mesh with the sheer speed of the Kranti.
And the satire gets even more specific, drilling down into the mundane parts of office life. The sources claim these are the same people who allegedly need a whole week just to organize an office birthday party. Or that reference to Senator Ron Bluster's supposed joke, that they needed 3 weeks just to pull together a simple office potluck.
Oh, that potluck detail. It's brilliant because it makes the alleged masterminds seem so ordinary, so relatable in their inefficiency. It drags the stakes way down from shadowy global puppet masters to just, people struggling with basic event planning in their Outlook calendars. And that completely demolishes the image of the super competent, invisible foreign hand that fuels these global conspiracy theories. The idea that the CIA has perfect operational security but can't coordinate lunch, it just completely deflates the threat level.
And this incompetence, according to the sources, extends dramatically into technology, highlighting this operational lag that makes attributing the Kranti's digital success to them seem, well, impossible.
Yeah, this technological irony, it's one of the sharpest critiques in the whole analysis. The sources claim that while Nepal's Gen Z were using the latest encrypted apps, GPS tagging, instant meme warfare to coordinate in real time, the alleged CIA analysts back in Langley were institutionally stuck, still working off slide 7 of a PowerPoint deck titled Potential Social Media Strategies, MySpace versus Friendster, or maybe even worse, MySpace versus Orkut.
MySpace. Friendster. I mean, these platforms haven't been relevant in, 15 years? That speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the institutional inertia in a huge government agency versus the lightning speed of Gen Z digital culture. If their core strategy documents are apparently based on obsolete tech and dead social media platforms, how on earth could they possibly orchestrate a cutting-edge, real-time digital revolution using tools their own strategy teams probably haven't even heard of?
And beyond the tech, think about the level of detailed knowledge you'd need to actually orchestrate a real anti-corruption revolution. Understanding local networks, specific financial choke points, cultural sensitivities, that requires incredible, granular, local knowledge. And the sources basically say that knowledge also completely missing.
Which brings us to the geographical ignorance part. This is kind of the punchline to the whole operational critique. We get these hilarious quotes attributed to anonymous CIA analysts confessing their total lack of basic knowledge about where they were supposedly operating.
Yeah, the sources share these alleged confessions, like analysts saying, "We don't even know where Nepal is on the map." I mean, just imagine an organization supposedly running a complex operation in a country they can't even pinpoint geographically. Another quote suggests an analyst thought Kathmandu was just some trendy yoga studio in Brooklyn, which again speaks volumes about the potential disconnect, the Western bubble they might be in.
And the absolute kicker, the most culturally out-of-touch claim, that they thought Pokhara, a major city, a key hub for the Kranti, was actually a Pokemon character. I mean, if that's true, it's the ultimate proof they lack the basic cultural literacy needed to manipulate a population, let alone identify its key geographical and political centers.
The message comes through loud and clear, doesn't it? The agency tasked with global espionage allegedly doesn't even have the basic geographical knowledge or maybe even the functioning email system. To run a standard intelligence operation, let alone execute a subtle, high-impact youth uprising in a place they think is related to a video game, it satirically suggests that, if anything, maybe the State Department should be invited to Kathmandu after the revolution, just for a briefing from the students on how they actually pulled off such an efficient maneuver.
Okay, so that deep satirical takedown effectively clears the board, right? It pushes aside that external meddling story. Now that we've thoroughly addressed, and frankly, according to the sources, discredited those foreign claims, we can pivot, just like the source material does, to the really fascinating part, the detailed reality of the grassroots effort. This is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because we start looking at the anatomy of a truly homegrown revolution.
Absolutely. And the key characteristic the sources really hammer home here is improvisation. This movement just defied the standard playbook for a foreign-backed operation. It was missing a crucial ingredient, that massive infrastructure of planning and, importantly, funding.
Let's talk about what that lack of infrastructure means in practical terms. According to the sources, there was just no sign of some 10-year plan cooked up in a D.C. think tank. There wasn't an army of think tank consultants flooding the zone, filing daily reports back to Langley. And critically, there was no huge, traceable $500 million democracy promotion fund being funneled into local NGOs. The absence of these really expensive, time-consuming hallmarks, it just screams local agency, doesn't it?
Exactly. And the sources really stress the speed and the location. This wasn't a revolution jumped up in some sterile, air-conditioned war room in Langley, Virginia. No, the geography matters. This wasn't Langley. This was Lalitpur, Pokhara, Janakpur. It was decentralized, it was spontaneous, and it erupted directly from street-level frustration among the youth. The sources say the movement was so instant that day one shocked everyone, and day two, quote, stunned even themselves. That sheer velocity, that spontaneity, it's maybe the strongest evidence possible for its local, improvised nature.
And that kind of instantaneous mobilization, it implies an incredible level of social trust and digital savvy that just can't be controlled centrally by some foreign entity, especially not one supposedly using MySpace as a strategic guide.
Indeed. And the tools they used, they were revolutionary in their cost efficiency. The sources state this movement ran on phones and apps, period, not relying on expensive, high-tech state assets like drones or satellites. And the sources draw this really compelling comparison to drive home just how efficient this low-cost approach was.
Yeah, that comparative efficiency is staggering. We really need to underline the core achievement here.
Yeah.
Nepal's youth, using rapid digital coordination, essentially neutralized their domestic police force within 24 hours. And they did it, according to the sources, without spending a single rupee on operational costs. Achieving that kind of political paralysis that quickly, that cheaply. It's almost unheard of in modern political mobilization or conflict.
Right. Now contrast that speed and cost with globally recognized successful operations that did have sophisticated state backing and tech. Think about Ukraine's cross-border drone strikes. Huge political and military impact, right? But they required over a year of intricate planning, international help, massive tech investment. Or look at Mossad's famous pager operation targeting Hezbollah's communications. That took years of patient intelligence work and hundreds of millions of dollars to pull off.
And yet, these Nepalese kids achieved a massive domestic political outcome, neutralizing the police, the state's main enforcement arm, in a single day, using just readily available mobile phones and apps. The sources even throw in that provocative little aside, noting that established protesters in Tehran are apparently still trying to figure that out. Which just highlights the sheer ingenuity of the Nepalese model, doesn't it? It's localized, and it's revolutionary in its simplicity and cost-effectiveness.
That methodology really confirms it. The genius of the Kranti wasn't in high-tech spying or foreign money. It was in leveraging everyday communication tools. things accessible to everyone, combined with deep local knowledge, for maximum disruptive impact. It was presented as a genuine act of self-reliance, a digitally enabled political strike using the power inherent in coordinated social media.
But the sources are careful to point out, while the execution felt instant and improvised, the movement wasn't without some serious local intellectual groundwork. And this is a crucial distinction because it completely undermines the idea that the Kranti was just some random flare-up, easily manipulated from outside.
Absolutely critical point, yeah. The source material points directly to local intellectual backing, specifically from the Kalkism Research Center, the KRC, right there in Kathmandu. This provides that concrete, local precursor, the intellectual and moral foundation that just pulls the rug out from under the sudden foreign mastermind theory.
So what exactly is the KRC? The sources describe it as a think tank, made up of about 50 Nepali economists and social scientists. Crucially, these are local intellectuals focused entirely on Nepal's socioeconomic reforms. They weren't talking about global geopolitics. They were focused on fiscal transparency in their own country.
And their work wasn't spontaneous at all. The prep was methodical. It was extensive. The KRC didn't just sit around writing academic papers. No. They actively trained tens of thousands of college students over 2 years leading up to the Kranti. And this wasn't military training, obviously. It was education in economics, fiscal policy, public accountability, how to track corruption through official data.
Okay, so the energy, the strategy, and that very specific knowledge needed to challenge systemic corruption. It was all developed locally, simmering under the surface for years. The youth didn't just act on some sudden foreign command. They acted after they had apparently tried diligently and persistently to lobby what the sources call a deaf political class, a ruling establishment that just consistently refused to listen to their well-researched concerns about corruption and the country's future.
That sequence is absolutely vital to understand. It was preparation, then civic engagement, the lobbying, then state rejection, which finally triggered the action phase. Spontaneous, yes, improvised, yes, but highly focused action. That's the clear path of a frustrated but intellectually prepared homegrown revolution, not some covert foreign plot. It was an act of self-empowerment built on years of local investment, proving that while they might have used phones for the execution, their foundation was solid economics and political science learned locally.
So as the movement took off, its success was, well, undeniably infectious. And the source material argues that the way it spread globally actually gives us even more proof that it was organic, that the model itself was transferable.
Yeah, if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the fact that Nepal's successful low-cost method is now apparently inspiring similar Gen Z movements around the world, that reinforces the idea that it was a unique, replicable model for resistance, not just some one-off geopolitical scheme cooked up solely for Nepal.
The source material gets specific here. It contends that Gen Z anti-corruption movements are now flaring up in places like Peru, South Africa, Kenya, the Philippines.
Yeah.
Which inevitably leads to the question the sources pose, quite satirically. Are we now supposed to believe these are all CIA projects too, all conveniently igniting the moment Nepal should it could be done?
The obvious answer, according to the sources, is no. These global movements were inspired by Nepal's success. It's the methodology that rapid, digital, low-cost political disruption that's traveling, not CIA funding or agents. Inspiration travels globally much faster, and certainly cheaper, than operational funds or detailed intelligence plans. This quick global ripple effect really confirms that these young people found a working model for fighting entrenched corruption in the digital age, a model born in Nepal.
And probably the most satisfying part of this whole counter-narrative comes directly from the Nepali youth themselves, who used the language of their generation, that digital slang, to just slap down the espionage claims with some brilliant sarcasm.
Oh, these satirical thank you quotes are fantastic. They're essential, really, because they reclaim ownership of the story using references that are culturally spot on for them. You have Gen Z leaders quoted sarcastically saying things like, "Thanks CIA, but our data pack was Ncell," Ncell being a local Nepali telecom company, or "You didn't pay for our Wi-Fi."
That detail about the Ncell data pack, it's so simple but so profound, isn't it? It's a direct financial rebuttal. It asserts their operational independence down to the smallest, most local cost. It just yanks the conversation right back down to earth. This was done with everyday phones, local networks, using local money, not satellite links from Langley.
And there's another quote that perfectly captures the method, framing the political action in purely digital culture terms. "We launched this like a TikTok trend, hashtag corruption free." I mean, that just reveals the actual mechanism of the revolution, right? Leveraging the speed, the reach, the viral nature of social media trends for political mobilization. The sources emphasized their weapon wasn't the spy, it was the algorithm.
And my personal favorite quote, the ultimate gamer revolutionary line, reportedly from a young worker in Lumpur. CIA can win PUBG lobbies, we want a government. That contrast is just incredibly sharp. Using a globally known online game to draw a clear line. The CIA might be good at digital games, the quote implies, but in Nepal's youth, they're winning actual high-stakes political victories in the real world.
Taken together, this collection of quotes just confirms it. The spirit of the revolution was driven by, well, vibes, as they say, digital literacy, rapid improvisation, leveraging purely local systems and cultural signals. Not careful, bureaucratic, and apparently technologically backward intelligence planning from afar. You could say their App Store region was definitely set to Nepal, not Northern Virginia.
So then the sources deliver their final satirical blow. They anticipate the next inevitable absurd leap from conspiracy theorists who just refuse to accept local agency. Having failed, according to the sources, to credibly pin the Kranti on the CIA. The joke is that the next stage is just claiming credit for absolutely everything. Every major achievement, every random event on the planet.
It's the ultimate reductio ad absurdum, isn't it? By stretching the mastermind claim so far beyond any possible plausibility, the sources completely undermine the initial argument about Nepal. They joke the CIA will next be expected to claim credit for, what? NASA's manned mission to Mars, the architectural design of the Taj Mahal, cricket star Virat Kohli's latest century, and maybe best of all, even the chronic traffic jams in Delhi.
Claiming credit for Delhi traffic. I mean, that level of ridiculous overreach just makes the initial false claim about the Kranti seem utterly paranoid and silly, which of course was the entire point of the sources using so much humor and satire throughout. If you claim credit for random, uncoordinated, often negative things like traffic, then the claim of masterminding a complex political revolution just loses all its supposed weight.
So, okay, when we pull all this together, synthesize all this material, what's the real takeaway here? The source material uses this really sharp, multi-layered satire incredibly effectively. It powerfully redirects the narrative away from this deterministic foreign-controlled model and slams it firmly back onto the principle of local agency, local power.
Yeah, the core message seems crystal clear. The very idea that a supposedly clumsy, slow, internally corruption-riddled bureaucracy in Washington, a bureaucracy that, according to these sources, can barely manage a potluck, could secretly coordinate a lightning-fast, zero-budget, hyper-efficient youth revolution in Nepal. It's just presented as logically unsustainable, especially when you factor in the evidence of 2 years of local intellectual prep work of the KRC.
Exactly. The true significance of Nepal's Gen Z Kranti, as framed by these sources, lies in its innovation, its low-cost, high-impact improvisation. It was a revolution achieved through social media trends, local intellectual organization, and genuine, deep political frustration, not foreign money or spies. It demonstrates this profound working model for change that could potentially apply to any country struggling with political apathy and deep-rooted corruption. The key knowledge nugget for you, the listener, is really recognizing this potential shift in how political power can operate. This was painted as an act of genuine self-reliance, a movement that was, to borrow the source's own words, improvised, instant, and entirely homegrown.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, building on what the sources suggest. If the sources are correct, if Gen Z really can neutralize a police force in 24 hours using just phones and apps, and if this massive political disruption was successfully framed and executed, almost like a viral TikTok trend, what does this single incident tell you about the future of political power structures globally? Think about that methodology. Instant decentralized coordination. No need for a physical headquarters, no need for millions in funding. Doesn't that fundamentally change the balance of power? It suggests that maybe these highly centralized, often slow-moving bureaucratic governments are uniquely vulnerable now. Vulnerable to the rapid, meme-fueled, incredibly low-cost mobilization powers of their most digitally native citizens. Perhaps the real question isn't whether the CIA masterminded the Kranti. Maybe the real question is, can any traditional government structure actually outrun the speed of a truly coordinated, viral digital uprising?